The sound was coming from her car, a desperate, scratchy cry. But behind her were only sealed Amazon boxes. So what could possibly be making that noise? When she opened the trunk, nothing looked out of place. Until she noticed that one of the boxes had irregular holes scratched into the top, as if something inside had clawed its way toward daylight. Heart pounding, she peeled back the tape, bracing herself for what she might find. She expected machinery, or maybe a rat. Instead, she found herself staring into the terrified wide eyes of a bobcat kitten who had no business being in the mail. He was dehydrated, terrified, and looked like he wanted to fight the entire world. How did a wild bobcat kitten end up sealed inside a delivery box? And when the sanctuary reviews their security footage, what they discover reveals a heartbreaking truth no one saw coming. Before we start, hit the like button and make sure to subscribe if you haven't, and hit that notification bell so that you won't miss any new stories. Skylar E. White did not panic easily, not after years of pulling injured owls from ditches and untangling pelicans from fishing line. But that morning, she nearly drove off the road because of a sound that did not belong inside her car. It was thin and scratchy, like a rusty hinge trying to cry, and it came from the rear of the vehicle at the exact moment she was congratulating herself for making good time back from the veterinary clinic. She eased her foot off the gas, blinked hard, and listened again, because surely it was the brakes, or the air vent, or some new rattling cup holder that wanted attention. Then the sound came again, clearer this time, and it did not sound like machinery at all. It sounded like a baby animal asking the world, in the smallest voice possible, not to forget it. Skylar pulled onto the shoulder of the road outside Riverview, Florida, hazard lights clicking like nervous fingers. Her first thought was practical, as it always was, because practical thinking had kept a lot of living things alive at Lady's Farm and Sanctuary. Every animal she had transported that morning was already checked in at the clinic. The crate count had been correct, the paperwork had been signed, and the receptionist had even offered her the usual candy from a bowl that always looked like it had been filled in 2009. So what, exactly, was crying inside her car? Skylar stepped out into the Florida air that never truly decided between warm and hot, walked around to the back, and opened the trunk. The trunk looked ordinary at first glance, which felt almost insulting. A stack of boxes sat there quietly, some with bright logos, some with shipping tape that promised happiness in 2-day increments, and one with a crumpled corner like it had been bumped by an impatient elbow. Skylar leaned in closer and the sound came again, and this time she could tell where it was coming from. Not from the spare tire, not from the medical tote, and not from any place that made sense. It came from inside one of the boxes. Skylar stared at the box the way a person stares at a mailbox after it speaks. Then she noticed something that made her stomach drop hard and fast. On the top of the box, the cardboard was dotted with irregular holes, not the neat punctures of a pen, but jagged little tears, as if something inside had scraped and clawed toward daylight with frantic determination. "Oh no," Skylar whispered, and it was not a dramatic whisper. It was the kind of whisper that belonged to a person who already knew the answer and wished the universe would offer a different one. She peeled back the tape with shaking fingers, opened the flaps, and looked inside. 2 wide eyes stared back at her, round and terrified, framed by little tufted ears that looked much too bold for a face that small. A tiny bobcat kitten was wedged down between packing paper and the side of the box, breathing fast, dusty whiskers trembling, his paws pressed against cardboard like he had been pushing for hours. For a split second, Skylar's brain tried to make it something else, because brains do that when they are desperate. But there was no mistaking the short bobbed tail, no mistaking the spotted coat, and definitely no mistaking the expression that said, very clearly, this baby had no idea how he had ended up in the mail. Skylar's heart did a painful little twist, and then her rescue instinct snapped into place like a seatbelt. She slipped both hands into the box carefully, supporting the kitten's chest and hindquarters the way the team taught every new volunteer, and she lifted him out as if he were made of glass and bad luck. He let out a weak rasp that was halfway between a complaint and a prayer. "Okay, sweetheart," Skylar murmured. "You're not shipping anywhere else today." The kitten tried to squirm, then gave up, because his body had no energy left for stubbornness. Skylar tucked him against her shirt and climbed into the driver's seat, already turning the car around, already calling the sanctuary on speakerphone. When the line picked up, the voice that answered belonged to Marlene, the sanctuary's senior caretaker, a woman who could identify a bird by silhouette and could also identify a volunteer by the sound of their excuses. "Marlene," Skylar said, keeping her voice steady on purpose, "there is a Bobcat kitten in the trunk." There was a pause, and then Marlene said very calmly, "Skylar, if this is a joke, it's too early, and I will retire today." "It is not a joke," Skylar said. He was inside a delivery box. Marlene exhaled one long breath that sounded like someone deflating a tire. "Of course he was," Marlene said, because at a place like Ladies' Farm and Sanctuary, the impossible often arrived without warning. "Bring him straight to intake. Warm towel, treatment room ready." Skylar drove as if the road had suddenly become more fragile than usual. Hands tight on the wheel, eyes flicking between mirrors and the tiny bundle on the passenger seat, because she had placed the kitten in a shallow bin lined with a towel the moment she realized he could not regulate his temperature well. He stared at her with exhausted suspicion, and his ears twitched as if even his own breathing was too loud. Back at the sanctuary, the team moved with practiced speed, but there was an undercurrent of disbelief that made everything feel slightly unreal. Jonah, a young volunteer with a kind face and a permanent sunburn, held open the intake door and stared at the kitten like he expected him to start reciting tracking numbers. "That is the smallest wildcat I have ever seen," Jonah said softly. "He looks like he belongs in a teacup." "He would hate a teacup," Marlene replied, already pulling on gloves. "He has the face of a tiny criminal." The kitten, hearing voices, attempted a hiss that came out like a squeaky door. It was so pathetic and so determined at the same time that Jonah made a sound halfway between laughter and heartbreak. "See?" Jonah said. "Tiny criminal." Skylar carried the kitten into the treatment room, where the sanctuary's wildlife veterinarian, Dr. Elaine Parker, met them with the expression of a woman who had learned long ago to expect the unexpected and still be annoyed by it. Dr. Parker's eyes flicked over the kitten in a quick professional scan. "Dehydrated," she said. "Coat looks dull, likely fleas, possibly an upper respiratory infection if that voice stays raspy." The kitten's belly was tight with hunger, and his gums were tacky, a small sign that told a big story. Somewhere out there, a mother bobcat was missing one of her babies, and a baby was missing his mother, and the world had solved that tragedy by closing him into a box with packing paper. Skylar swallowed hard, because the cruelty of accidents could feel personal when the victim was small. They worked through the first hour in quiet focus. Warmth first, because cold stress could kill faster than hunger. Then subcutaneous fluids, carefully measured, because dehydration could turn dangerous quickly in a kitten that size. Then a flea comb and gentle treatment, because flea-induced anemia was no joke, and bobcat kittens could lose strength frighteningly fast. Marlene kept her movements steady and minimal, because the goal was never to create a cuddly pet. The goal was always the same, no matter how cute the patient was. Heal the body, protect the wild mind, and give the animal back to the world with dignity. Even so, it was hard not to react when the kitten found a tiny reserve of outrage and tried to bite the corner of a glove with all the menace his little mouth could manage. His teeth were so small they felt more like a rude opinion than an actual bite. Dr. Parker did not even flinch. "Good," she said. "He's got fight." Jonah, watching from a respectful distance, whispered, "He's about to demand customer service." Marlene shot Jonah a look, but the corner of her mouth lifted anyway. They placed the kitten in a quiet, dim enclosure, separated from other animals, because quarantine mattered and respiratory infections could spread like gossip. A small stuffed toy was placed in the corner, not to make him feel loved, but to give him something to knead and wrestle that wasn't a human hand. They offered warmed formula appropriate for wild felines, fed with careful technique to prevent aspiration, and they watched his throat as he swallowed, because every swallow counted. He drank like a creature who had been waiting for permission to survive. When he finished, he blinked slowly, then immediately tried to stand with a wobble that suggested his legs were still negotiating the terms of reality. He took one step, fell sideways into the towel, and looked offended by gravity. Skylar, despite herself, let out a quiet laugh that sounded suspiciously like relief. "There it is," she said softly. "The attitude." The next piece of the puzzle came later that day, because Skylar needed to know how this could happen on their property without anyone noticing. Lady's Farm and Sanctuary had security cameras at the gate for practical reasons, including deliveries, trespassing, and the occasional person who tried to donate a rooster by tossing it over the fence like a questionable football. Skylar and Marlene rewound the footage until they found the moment that made everything fall into place. On the screen, the gate sat under a porch light. A pile of packages rested near the entrance, looking warm and sheltered in the night air. Then a small shape appeared, creeping in with the cautious confidence of a kitten who had no idea he was lost. The Bobcat kitten sniffed the boxes, pawed at a flap that had popped open slightly, and climbed inside as if he were exploring a cave. For a second, he stood in the open box, ears up, scanning the world, a tiny wildcat king surveying a cardboard kingdom. Then he stepped down into packing paper, and the paper shifted, and his little body sank deeper than he expected. He tried to climb out, but his back feet slipped, because cardboard and panic did not make good ladders. At that exact moment, the wind nudged the top flap down. The lid closed with a gentle tap that sounded harmless, like nothing at all. Inside the box, the kitten thrashed, and the cardboard jumped, and then the box went still again, as if it had swallowed a secret. Jonah, watching the footage, covered his mouth with one hand. "That poor baby," he said. "He just wanted warmth." Marlene shook her head slowly. "It happens," she said. "Curiosity and hunger make animals take risks that would make a sensible adult faint." Skylar stared at the screen a moment longer, noticing how the kitten had approached the boxes with no mother in sight. A kitten that small should not have been alone. That meant something had happened, something the sanctuary might never fully know. But the result was sitting in their treatment room, breathing raspily and refusing to give up. The first week was a mixture of worry and small victories. The kitten received supportive care for the upper respiratory infection, monitored closely so it did not progress into pneumonia, and his hydration status was checked constantly. His red blood cell levels improved as the fleas were eliminated, and his coat slowly regained its shine, as if the life in him was turning the lights back on one bulb at a time. He began to gain weight, which in rescue work always felt like the sweetest kind of progress. In between medical tasks, the team discovered something else. The kitten had a sense of timing that was almost comedic. He could be silent for hours, curled in his bedding like an innocent little lump, and then the moment someone stepped into the room with a clipboard, he would unleash the most dramatic, rasping meow imaginable, as if he had been neglected for centuries. Jonah called it the customer review. Marlene called it lungs improving, but she started walking in with a straight face and saying, "Yes, sir, your package has arrived. No refunds." The kitten would glare, then attempt a hiss, then sneeze into his own paw as if his body could not decide whether to be fierce or fragile. Skylar watched those moments with a tenderness she kept carefully contained, because the line between compassion and imprinting could be thin if people forgot their purpose. So they minimized talking around him, handled him only when necessary, and used barriers and routine to keep him wild. But the team was human, and humor was part of survival too. On the day the kitten discovered his reflection in a stainless steel bowl, he puffed up and threw a punch at himself, then jumped backward like he had been ambushed by an identical twin with terrible manners. Jonah, passing by, whispered, "He's starting fights with his own face now." Dr. Parker replied without looking up, "Excellent. He's ready for Florida." By the second week, the kitten's appetite became impressive, which was both good news and a logistical problem. He began eating with the seriousness of someone who believed every meal might be the last one ever offered. He would plant his front paws like anchors, lower his head, and make small, determined growls that sounded like a toy engine. Once, when Jonah refilled the dish too slowly, the kitten slapped the edge of the bowl, sending a bit of food sliding across the towel. Then he stared at Jonah with pure outrage, as if Jonah had invented hunger personally. Marlene watched from the doorway and said, "That's the wildcat spirit right there." Skylar nodded, even as she felt her chest lighten. A bobcat kitten with attitude was a bobcat kitten who intended to live. As his strength returned, the team began the next stage of rehabilitation, which always involved teaching wild behaviors without teaching dependence on humans. They introduced natural scents, branches, and hiding spots. They moved him into a larger enclosure where he could climb and leap, because muscles needed practice to become useful again. His first attempt at climbing a low branch ended with him slipping and landing on his backside, a moment that would have been hilarious if it hadn't been immediately followed by him pretending he had done it on purpose. He looked around as if checking whether anyone had seen. When he realized Marlene had witnessed everything, he stiffened and tried the climb again with more dignity. Marlene, deadpan, said, "Better. No one gets to laugh at you but the squirrels." The day he successfully pounced on a dangling toy meant to mimic prey movement, Skylar felt a lump rise in her throat that had nothing to do with sadness. The kitten grabbed the toy, kicked with his back feet, and shook his head like a tiny predator practicing for a future that was finally possible. Then he carried the toy into a corner and sat on it like a dragon guarding treasure. Jonah whispered, "If Amazon ever delivers him again, he's going to leave a strongly worded note." Even in the middle of progress, reality stayed honest. There were days his breathing sounded rough again, days his appetite dipped, days the team watched him extra carefully, knowing how quickly fragile animals could crash. Skylar did not allow herself to forget the image of those clawed holes in the box lid. That had not been mischief. That had been desperation. When he slept, he often curled tightly, as if still worried the lid might close again. So the team provided consistent warmth, quiet, and a predictable routine, because predictability was a kind of kindness in a world that had already surprised him too much. Weeks passed, and the kitten became less of a kitten. His legs lengthened, his ears stayed boldly tufted, and his movements grew smooth, quick, and confident. He started responding to humans the right way, with wariness and distance, which Skylar celebrated even though it felt strange to be happy about being disliked. That was how rehab work often felt, loving something enough to make sure it did not love back. In the pre-release enclosure, he learned to stalk, to freeze, to listen, and to disappear into brush so completely that Jonah once spent 10 minutes searching before realizing the young Bobcat was watching him from a shadow with quiet superiority. Marlene, hearing Jonah's frustrated sigh, said, "Good. If he can fool you, he can fool everything else." On a bright Florida morning, when the young Bobcat's weight and blood work and behavior all signaled readiness, the team prepared for the moment they worked toward from the first day. They loaded him into a secure carrier, covered it to reduce stress, and drove to a protected release site coordinated with proper wildlife guidelines, because legality and ethics mattered as much as hope. Skylar stood with Marlene and Dr. Parker, listening to the sounds of the land, the birds, the insects, the distant rustle that reminded everyone how full the world could be when it was healthy. When Skylar opened the carrier door, she did not lean in close, did not whisper sentimental goodbyes, did not try to make the moment about herself. She simply stepped back and gave the animal space to choose. The young Bobcat hesitated, nose testing the air, ears swiveling like little radar dishes. Then he stepped out, one paw at a time, body low, eyes scanning. He paused once, turned his head slightly, and looked back in the direction of the humans, not with affection, but with awareness, as if filing away the memory that the world sometimes trapped you and sometimes let you go. Then he vanished into the brush with a softness that felt like magic. Jonah exhaled, his shoulders dropping. Marlene let out a quiet, satisfied sound. Dr. Parker nodded once, like a judge approving a verdict. Skylar stood still for a moment longer, allowing herself a single private thought, the kind that came with both relief and reverence. A random bit of curiosity had nearly cost that little wildcat his life, and a simple wind-blown flap had turned an ordinary delivery into a locked prison. But the story had ended differently. Not because the world was always kind, but because a group of stubborn, caring humans refused to let cardboard be the final chapter. Back at the sanctuary later, Skylar walked past the gate where the packages were usually left. A volunteer had placed a large sign by the delivery area, simple and clear, with a touch of humor that made the lesson stick. "Please close box flaps," it read. "Wildlife does not have a return label." Skylar laughed quietly, then felt her throat tighten again, because that was how these rescues worked. They made people laugh in the middle of fear, and they made people cry in the middle of relief, and they left everyone a little more careful than before. That night, as the sanctuary settled, Marlene checked the cameras one more time out of habit. The screen showed the gate, empty and calm. Packages safe behind a closed container now. The porch light shining on nothing dramatic at all. Marlene leaned back in her chair and said softly, mostly to herself, "Good." Because sometimes the happiest ending was not a miracle on camera. Sometimes the happiest ending was simply a quiet night where every wild thing stayed free, every box stayed closed, and every small life stayed exactly where it belonged.